What if I told you that the person you think you are doesn't actually exist? That the solid, stable, continuous you that feels like it's living somewhere behind your eyes is an illusion, a ghost, a story your brain is telling itself, moment by moment. This isn't just a wild thought experiment. It's a reality hinted at by the strangest and most successful theory in all of science, quantum mechanics. And it's a reality now being mapped by modern neuroscience to unlock a truly profound state of self-awareness, to get rid of that deep, gnawing anxiety that comes from defending a phantom. That old version of you has to die. This process is sometimes called ego death. And while it sounds terrifying, it's not about dying. It's about waking up. It's the death of a prison, not a person. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll see why letting your old self dissolve might just be the most liberating thing you ever do. From the moment we're old enough to understand, we're taught to build an identity. We're given a name. We have a body. We start collecting memories, and we make a list of our wins and our losses. We become a son, a daughter, a parent, a friend, an employee. We spend our entire lives polishing this identity, defending it, and showing it to the world. This is our ego. This is the I we're convinced we are. In the old school, classical way of looking at the world, a world of solid things that follow predictable rules, it makes sense that we'd see ourselves as solid and predictable. 2, we think of the self as a thing, a little captain in the control room of our brain, pulling levers and steering our body through life. And honestly, this is the source of so much of our suffering. Think about it. Why do we feel anxious? We're afraid that this self will be harmed, judged, or somehow made smaller. We worry about the future because we're desperately trying to protect this identity. We get stuck on the past because we're replaying its embarrassing moments, seeing them as permanent stains on our record. We fear death because we believe it's the ultimate end of this one and only I. This self becomes a fortress we feel we have to defend 24/7. We build walls around it made of opinions, beliefs, and accomplishments. We charge into battle if someone's view threatens our own. We feel that pit in the stomach shame when we fail, because it's not just an event. It feels like a crack in the very foundation of who we are. The ego is a relentless boss. It needs constant validation. It's always comparing, always measuring itself against others, and always coming up short or puffing itself up with superiority. It's a full-time job, and the pay is stress, fear, and that constant, low-level feeling of being trapped. But what if this whole struggle is based on a lie? What if you're not a thing, but a process, not a noun, but a verb? What if the fortress you've been defending so fiercely is actually empty? This is where our journey takes a sharp turn, away from the solid, predictable world and into the shimmering, bizarre world of quantum physics. Okay, a quick but really important point here. We're about to use some ideas from quantum mechanics as powerful analogies to help us shatter our rigid, outdated ideas about the self. There's no scientific consensus that our consciousness is a quantum phenomenon. And many physicists rightly criticize what's called quantum mysticism, misapplying these ideas to spirituality. They correctly point out that these weird quantum effects are usually stuck in the subatomic world and don't just ripple up to affect our big, warm, noisy brains. So, we're not saying your brain is literally a quantum computer. We're using our best description of reality as a mirror to reflect a deeper truth about our own experience. With that in mind, let's look at one of the strangest ideas in quantum physics: superposition. At the quantum level, before you measure it, a particle like an electron isn't in one single place. It's a cloud of possibilities, a superposition of all the places it could be, all at once. It's a wave of pure potential. And only when something interacts with it does it pop into a specific location. So, what on earth does that have to do with your anxiety about a work presentation? Let's apply this as an analogy. What if your self isn't one fixed thing, but is also in a state of superposition? A constant flow of potential thoughts, emotions, and identities. One moment, you're the confident professional. The next, you're the insecure kid. Then, the compassionate friend. You aren't one of these things. Before you collapse into a single identity by latching onto a thought, you are the potential for all of them. The illusion of a single, stable you is created when your mind grabs one of those states and says, "This one. This is me." The anxiety comes from trying to hold that one state in place, terrified it might collapse into one you don't like. Next, there's the famous observer effect. In quantum physics, the very act of measuring something changes it. When you observe which slit a particle goes through in the double-slit experiment, you force it to pick a side, collapsing its wave of potential into a single point. Now, the mainstream scientific view is that the observer can be any measuring device, not just a person, but as a metaphor for our own minds. This is incredibly powerful. Think of your awareness as the act of observation. A storm of feelings swirls inside you, a superposition of anger, sadness, joy, and peace. The moment your mind, the observer, latches onto one, "I am angry," it collapses that whole wave of potential into that single state. You don't just feel anger, you become anger. In this analogy, the observer effect is how your brain creates the illusion of a solid self. It's that constant, unconscious habit of measuring, labeling, and identifying with the flow of experience, which freezes it into a seemingly solid thing. This process builds the ego's prison. But what if you could learn to be the space where the wave exists, instead of the one who keeps collapsing it? What if you could just watch the storm of thoughts and feelings without having to become them? This isn't just philosophy anymore. Modern neuroscience is starting to find the actual hardware that runs this self-program, and more importantly, what happens when we switch it off? For decades, scientists have been hunting for the ego's home in the brain. While consciousness is still a huge mystery, they've found a brain network that gets tantalizingly close. It's called the Default Mode Network, or DMN. You can think of the DMN as your brain's inner narrator. It's a network that lights up when you're not focused on the outside world, when your mind wanders, when you're thinking about yourself, dwelling on the past, worrying about the future, wondering what people think of you. That's the DMN at work. It's the biological source of the story of me, us, and mine. This network is vital for planning and getting along with others. But when it's overactive, it's linked to all sorts of trouble, like depression, anxiety, and obsessive thinking. When the storyteller gets too loud, we get lost in the story. We mistake the narrative for reality. We get trapped in the past and become anxious about the future, because that's the DMN's native language. This is where the science gets really wild. Research using psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD has given neuroscientists a rare glimpse into what happens when the default mode network goes quiet. Under the influence of these substances, activity in the DMN drops dramatically. The brain's usual rigid patterns temporarily loosen, and new lines of communication open up between regions that don't normally interact. These experiences are not shortcuts or recommendations. They are research windows' ways of observing what happens when the brain's self-model begins to loosen. And when this happens, what do people report? They report the experience known as ego dissolution. The feeling of being a separate self begins to melt away. The boundary between me and the world becomes blurry or disappears altogether. That relentless inner narrator finally goes quiet. What remains is often a profound sense of connection, a feeling of being part of a unified whole, and a significant reduction in anxiety and the fear of death. Studies consistently show a direct link between increased brain connectivity and the subjective intensity of ego dissolution. Ongoing research, including studies published as recently as 2025, continues to show how these compounds can rapidly reorganize the brain, temporarily dissolving rigid thought patterns associated with depression and addiction. Research on dimethyltryptamine, commonly known as DMT, for example, shows that it disrupts specific brainwave patterns linked to DMN activity. And the degree of this disruption closely correlates with how intensely people report the dissolution of their sense of self. But you don't need psychedelics to experience this. Deep meditation, entering a flow state, or having a peak experience in nature can all quiet the DMN and offer a similar taste of freedom from the inner narrator. When you're fully absorbed in creating art, playing a sport, or simply watching an extraordinary sunset, the sense of you temporarily fades. The storyteller falls silent, and for a moment, there is only the experience itself. That too is a taste of ego dissolution. The term ego death is pretty scary. It sounds like annihilation, the end of everything you are. And that fear is the ego's ultimate defense. The story doesn't want to end, but let's redefine it. Ego death isn't the death of your body or your mind. It's not about losing your personality or your unique quirks. It is the death of an identification. It's the deep, gut-level realization that you are not the limited, isolated character in the story your brain is telling you. You are the awareness in which the story is happening. Imagine you're at the movies, completely lost in the film. You're totally identified with the main character, feeling their victories and their heartbreaks as if they were your own. Now, imagine that right at the climax. You suddenly remember that you're not the character on the screen. You're the person sitting in the theater, watching the movie. Does the person in the theater die? No. Do they lose their personality? Of course not. What dies is the illusion that they were the character. A huge wave of relief washes over them. They can still enjoy the story, but they're no longer trapped by its drama. They're free. That is ego death. It's a shift in perspective from being the content of your consciousness to being the context. It's the end of the contracted, fearful self and the beginning of an open, expansive awareness. This isn't some New Age idea. It's a central goal in many of the world's great spiritual traditions. In Buddhism, it's called anatta, or no self. In Hinduism's Advaita Vedanta, it's the realization that the individual soul is one with universal consciousness. Christian mystics talk about dying to the self to be reborn in God. These traditions created detailed maps for this journey of letting go. They knew it wasn't a single event, but a process of shedding layer after layer of false identity. And by blending their ancient wisdom with what we know today, we can sketch out a map for this journey ourselves. This journey isn't a straight line. It's more like a spiral, where you revisit the same themes again and again, but at deeper levels. Drawing from spiritual traditions and modern psychology, we can see a pattern, a series of stages many people go through as that old self starts to unravel. Think of this as a rough guide, not a strict set of rules. Stage 1. The spiritual awakening. It often starts with a crisis, a loss, a failure, a health scare, or just a deep, nagging feeling that something is missing. The usual distractions just don't work anymore. The success you've been chasing feels empty. You start asking the big questions: who am I? Really, what is all this for? This is the first crack in the ego's fortress. It's the moment you realize the role you're playing just isn't satisfying anymore. Stage 2, the dark night of the soul. As the ego's old structures start to weaken, you can fall into a period of deep confusion and despair. This is probably the hardest part. The old answers don't work, but the new ones haven't shown up yet. You feel lost, confused, and totally alone. This isn't a sign that something has gone wrong. It's a sign the process is working. This is the ego's winter. The old, fear-based identity is being starved of its power. It's a necessary purification, a burning away of your deepest attachments to the illusion of being a separate, fragile self. It's terrifying, but it's the fire that forges a new awareness. Stage 3, the spiritual seeker. After passing through the worst of the darkness, you emerge with a new sense of purpose. You start actively looking for answers. You might dive into meditation, yoga, spiritual books, or philosophy. You're trying to find tools to understand what's happening to you. But a new, more subtle ego can form here, the spiritual ego. You might start identifying with being a meditator, a yogi, or as someone more aware than others. This is a totally normal part of the process, the ego trying to rebuild itself with spiritual stuff. The trick here is to see this new identity as just another costume. Stage 4, discernment and purification. Here, you start to see through that spiritual ego. You notice the habit of using spiritual ideas to avoid difficult emotions or to feel superior. The focus shifts from just collecting knowledge to actually living with wisdom. This stage is about dissolving the ego of being good or being right. The heart opens up, moving from conditional love to a more unconditional acceptance of whatever comes. It's a stage of radical honesty and humility. Stage 5. The collapse of the final identities. This is where the deepest layers of the ego dissolve. The identification with the mind itself, that core belief that I am, my thoughts, starts to crumble. You see thoughts as ownerless events that just pop up and fade away in your awareness. The identity of being a seeker also falls away. And when the seeker disappears, what's left? There's no one left to get enlightened. There is only enlightenment. There is no one left to experience reality. There is only reality. Stage 6, transfiguration and integration. This isn't an end, but a new beginning. The ego isn't destroyed. It's transformed into a transparent tool for a deeper intelligence to work through. It becomes a servant, not a master. The old, heavy, fear-based self has died, and what's reborn is a lighter, more fluid, more authentic way of being. You still live in the world, but you're not of the world. Life's challenges still happen, but you meet them with a sense of peace and trust, because you no longer identify with the small self they could harm. This map shows us that the death of the old self is a gradual, profound, and ultimately freeing process of unbecoming everything you thought you were, just to finally discover what you truly are. So what does life actually look like on the other side of this? When the tyrannical voice of the ego quiets down and the illusion of being separate dissolves. What's left? The benefits, reported by both ancient traditions and modern psychological research, are life-changing. The most immediate and powerful benefit is a huge reduction in anxiety, depression, and the fear of death. A 2022 systematic review that analyzed 15 different studies confirmed that experiences of ego dissolution are linked with a higher chance of psychological improvement. When you truly realize, in your bones, that you are not the limited, fragile ego, the things that used to terrify that ego just lose their grip. Failure isn't a personal attack anymore. It's just feedback. Other people's opinions aren't threats. They're just information. Even the fear of death fades, because what you identify with is the timeless awareness, not the temporary body and personality. Second, you experience a dramatic increase in presence and joy in everyday life. The ego, with its constant DMN-fueled narration, lives almost exclusively in the past and the future. When that narrator goes quiet, you finally arrive in the present moment. The simple act of washing dishes, walking outside, or having a conversation becomes vibrant and alive, because you're not filtering it through the constant chatter of what's in it for me. You experience reality directly. This is the state of flow becoming your new normal. Third, there's a natural blossoming of compassion and altruism. The illusion of being a separate self is the root of all selfishness. When that illusion dissolves, you feel a deep connection to others and the planet. Their suffering feels like your suffering. Their joy feels like your joy. This isn't some moral rule you have to follow. It's the spontaneous result of an expanded awareness. A sustained sense of this connection is one of the most positive outcomes reported in studies. Research into psychedelic-assisted therapy has shown these benefits for years. Patients with deep-seated PTSD, addiction, and end-of-life anxiety often say the mystical experience of ego dissolution was the turning point in their recovery. It allowed them to see their problems from a completely new, liberated perspective. As one researcher put it, people who go through psychedelic experiences no longer take it for granted that the way they've been viewing things is the only way. This isn't about becoming some perfect, emotionless robot. It's about becoming more fully human. You still have a personality. You still have preferences. You still have a life story, but you wear them lightly, like a comfortable jacket, instead of being trapped in them like a suit of armor. You are finally free from the exhausting, full-time job of defending a phantom. This is the ultimate liberation. We started with a pretty wild question. What if the person you believe yourself to be doesn't really exist? We've walked through the prison of the solid self and the anxiety it fuels. We've used the strange and beautiful ideas from quantum physics as a mirror to shatter that image, revealing a self that's fluid, full of potential, and deeply interconnected. We've looked at the neuroscience of the default mode network, the brain storyteller, and seen how quieting this network can lead to the dissolution of the ego. We've traced the path of this dissolution, from the first wake-up call to the deep peace on the other side. And we've seen the incredible benefits that are waiting there, a life with less fear, rooted in the present and filled with compassion. The death of your old self isn't an ending. It's a homecoming. It's shedding a false identity that was never really you in the first place. It's realizing that you are not the wave, being tossed around by the storms of life. You are the entire ocean. So I'll leave you with this question to carry with you. Who would you be? What would you do? And how would you live if you were no longer afraid? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. If this resonated with you, please like the video and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. For more content exploring the intersection of science, spirituality, and the deepest questions of our existence, make sure you subscribe. Click here to watch another video on a related topic. Until next time, be well.